we are back. It is another year and another Police Academy movie. So yeah, again, about a year's downtime in between. Not even a year downtime. So the last one came out in 1985. This one came out in 1986. So yeah, they are cranking these babies out. I've looked for, in preparation for this series and the deep research that I do, I tried to find some information on the making of these movies, apart from just, interviews with directors and actors. And I wanted, kind of the nuts and bolts of how it was decided, but there's just not that much information. I just don't think, documentaries and whatnot and behind the scenes things were as big back then, because home video was still kind of a niche market, and even then they didn't, this is way before DVD extras and whatnot, so there's just not a lot out there. But I imagine that after the success, even though critically Police Academy 2 was somewhat panned, but again, none of these were exactly critical darlings. But still, even by the measures of the Police Academy films, I think critics and audiences generally were not as enthused with the sequel as they were with the original. And I believe partly because of the changes that we mentioned to the formula. The things that people liked about the first one that were not present in the second one. So with Police Academy now a bona fide franchise, I think once you hit 3 or 4, that's when I think when you hit 4, you become a franchise. But the way they're turning these things out, I think they already kind of had things in place, and they had a plan in place, and they were pretty much relying on this series to kind of keep doing the business it was doing, even if it wasn't, great. But, the answer to that is, decrease the budget each time. But I feel like they had this pretty well scouted and planned and decided, okay, we're coming back, we're doing another one. So if people didn't like the changes that were made in the last one, well, let's go back and just redo what worked well in the first one and basically remake Police Academy 1. And that's essentially what they did, and I think it was the smartest decision they could have made. These next couple are the ones that I think a lot of people fell in love with. Like I said, these are the ones that were rerun multiple times. They were always on. They were easy to catch. So I think that these are the ones that a lot of people remember the most, and remember with the most reverence, or at least with the most fond memories attached to them. So the concept here is pretty straightforward. We're going back to training, as the title would suggest, only this time the ragtag group of misfits from the first film are now the instructors, and we have a new ragtag group of misfits to take their place. Yes, folks, welcome to Police Academy 3, Back in Training.
I love the 80s. I love the 80s.
So, what is the story? I have to say that in rewatching these for this series of reviews, as I think I mentioned in the very first one, it has been so long since I had seen any of these. They were staples of my childhood, and yet from about my teenage years on, I never gave them a second thought. So it's been a very, very long time since I saw some of these, and it shows, because when I rewatched this one for the first time, I was amazed at how much I didn't remember. And again, I stress that this was one of the ones that I watched the most in my youth, but there are huge chunks that I don't remember. I remember some of the gags. I remember the former recruits now being the trainers, and there being a new batch of recruits. I remember all that. I remember, like I say, certain bits, but the underlying plot of it, I really I didn't recall. So I was kind of shocked when I was like, wait, there are 2 police academies? Yes. The storyline to this one is that there are 2 police academies. I don't know if there have always been 2 police academies or if this is a fairly new development. I assume that the second police academy is a fairly new development because it's supposed to be a little bit more modern. And the commandant of this one is the returning now Commandant Mauser, once again played by Art Materno from Police Academy 2. However, they have decided that the state, whichever state this takes place in, cannot afford 2 police academies, and so one of them is going to be shut down. That they're going to have a board of inquiry. These people kind of visit both and follow the cadets around and whatnot, and it's kind of like a competition, and the loser will get shut down. So Mauser teams up with kind of like forms the Legion of Doom of Police Academy movies. Teams up with the returning Lieutenant Proctor, Lance Kinsey, and now Sergeants Copeland and Blanks from the original Police Academy, again played by Scott Thompson and Brant von Hoffman. Though I gotta say, I gotta wonder, it would be interesting to have been in the audience for this when it first came out, and to see if anybody recognized these 2 when they showed up, because they don't look anything alike. Maybe that's because most of the first Police Academy, they had the buzz cuts, and now they've got longer hair, so it's like you didn't. But yeah, when they first showed up, I was like, who are these guys? But yes, so Copeland and Blanks, who are still at Lassard's Academy, are going to be Mauser's undercover agents, basically circumventing Lassard from the inside and working to rig the game so that his academy, which he runs very much like a military installation, even their uniforms are very military, they've got the berets and all that, that his academy is the one that survives and Lassard's is the one that goes under. So Lassard, looking to find the best way to survive, decides, I've got to bring back Mahoney. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So yes, brings back Mahoney, Hightower, Jones, Hooks, Tackleberry, and yay, Callahan. Lieutenant Callahan is back. Brings back the core cast of the original Police Academy to help mold the new recruits, and that's kind of our plot. It's a competition between these 2 academies to see who's going to survive: the ragtag group of misfits, or the ne'er-do-wells from the right side of the track. So yeah, and as setups for a sequel go, that is not bad. Actually, I think it's a pretty clever setup. And while I am on record as saying I was not a fan of Police Academy 2, I do think you kind of need that buffer film in between these 2. You couldn't just jump from them being losers and misfits in the first one and then suddenly training a group of new recruits in the second one. You sometimes the middle part needs to be a little bit weaker or lesser than in order to set up for something bigger going on. Like, I kind of remember people badmouth Avengers Age of Ultron, and yeah, Avengers Age of Ultron is not as good as the original or Captain America Civil War or Avengers Endgame, but you needed that middle film to kind of say this is the status quo, because if you don't do that, then there's nothing to break apart in Civil War. Same thing here. I think you needed that middle film to kind of say, these guys went out, they are cops, they're having careers, they're using their abilities on the street, and so they do have something to pass on. What I really like about this setup, what I think is really, really good about it, is that it allows for a lot of great character development from some of our core cast who maybe don't get as much screen time. Particularly Marion Ramsey as now Sergeant Hooks, who again does not get as much screen time as the others, but we see that she has gone from this meek little mouse of a person, kind of scared of her own shadow, to now being one of the primary instructors. Like, she breaks out her boss voice, like, right off the bat, no waiting around, and she's teaching, like most of the classes that these kids are taking. So she's teaching them the driving, she's teaching about using the call board and all that. So Hooks has gone from a scaredy cat to being a competent cop and a great instructor. So, I mean, that's really great to see these characters kind of move into those positions of authority and how they handle it different from the folks that came before them. So I kind of got mixed up there. This is what part of the problem with doing these a little bit off the cuff. So I talked about our returning characters. But let's talk about our new recruits, which some of them are returning characters as well. So let's talk about who are the new ragtag group of misfits, because we've got quite the assortment here. So in from Police Academy 2, we have Sweet Check, once again played by Tim Kazurinsky, and Zed, played by Bobcat Goldthwait, who has reformed apparently after the events of Police Academy 2, and has decided to join the police for no real rhyme or reason other than it's funny, and Bobcat Goldthwait is funny, and putting him with Sweet Check is also very funny. They make a really good comedy team. They pair very well. Especially, again, this is what I kind of like about these sequels. They work really well as a comedy team in a standalone feature. But if you go back and you've seen all of them and you saw their interactions in Police Academy 2, then there's more layers to it. Just how much, Sweet Chick probably resents Zed, and why he's so afraid of him, and just why, when he finally snaps on him, there's a lot of pent-up frustration in there. So Sweet Chick and Zed are here, and they have decided to join the Police Academy. Also joining the Police Academy, a character from Police Academy 2 that I didn't really talk about much. I kind of mentioned, but said we were going to talk more about him here, is Andrew Paris as Kirkland. So he is Kathleen Kirkland, IG Tackleberry's wife's brother. He's Tackleberry's brother-in-law, who's a kid, I guess, just fresh out of high school. We met him and her family, including her father, Arthur played by Arthur Brandis, in the first one when the second one when Tackleberry goes over to her house for dinner and they get into a fist fight, laughing the whole time, and Tackleberry is just looking incredibly uncomfortable by the entire situation. But now he is joining the academy. Kind of an interesting one in, one out. Let's talk about this. So another new recruit is Deborah Lee Scott as Violet Fackler, the wife of Sergeant Fackler from the first two movies. We recall that the last time we saw Violet Fackler, she was trying to stop her husband from going to the police academy by jumping on the hood of his car while he was driving. So they repeat that gag here, only now it's Fackler hanging on to the car while she's driving, and trying to stop her from going to the academy. Again, this is kind of an interesting one in, one out, because while Violet Faulkner is going to be one of our main cadets for the film, after this bit, Sergeant Faulkner is gone. Like, he is gone from the movie. With no explanation as to where he is or what happened. And I have tried, once again, to do some research into this and try to figure out, what happened. Was there a scheduling conflict? Was he doing something else at the time and could only do this little section? Are there deleted scenes that he was in that for some reason got cut out? I don't know. He's just gone. And what's weirder is that he's gone, as far as I can recall, from the next several Police Academy movies, not returning until Police Academy 6. So what happened? And again, I do not have an answer for you. I have a guess. I have a hypothesis, but I have no means of proving this. So my hypothesis is that the writers and the producers or whoever decided they liked the character of Sweet Check a little bit better than they liked Faulkner, which makes kind of sense to me, because in terms of the commedia sensibilities of the stock characters, there's a lot more to Faulkner. He's smaller, he's nerdier, there is a lot more in terms of comedy that you can do with him. And he and Faulkner looked very, very similar. Like, they were both dark-haired, glasses. I mean, they looked alike. So I have a feeling that while Faulkner was in there, while Sweet Check was in there, they kind of were worried that people were going to confuse him and Faulkner. As a matter of fact, I did confuse him and Faulkner for a long time. I'll talk about that when we get there. But they might have said, this guy offers more and there's more we can do with him, and let's push him and not so much worry about the other guy, I think. Again, I have no proof of this. Nothing backs this up. This is just what I think happened. So yeah. So, in with Cadet Faulkner, out with Sergeant Faulkner. A couple others. And this one's a little less interesting. So we have David Hubbard as Cadet Hedges. Hedges is essentially doing the exact same shtick, at least in the opening, that Kim Cattrall was doing in the original. He's a rich guy who joins the police academy for reasons that are never explained. And just like Kim Cattrall, he has a hot relationship with Mahoney. No, he doesn't, I'm sorry. But just like Kim Cattrall, they do absolutely nothing with this archetype. They do nothing with this character that has anything to do with him being rich and snobby, outside of really one of the least funny jokes in the entire thing when he first pulls up to the academy and he thinks that Hightower is the porter and asks him to take his bags, and Hightower chucks his bags over the wall, which is a joke that makes no sense, because you are pulling up to a police academy. There are dozens of people in police uniforms. Outside of just being a racist, why would you think the big black guy in a police uniform is a porter? Where, like I said, aside from one of the least funny jokes in the thing, they really do nothing with this revelation that he's a rich guy. So yeah, we also have Sean Weatherly as Cadet Adams. Cadet Adams is filling the Kim Cattrall role in that she is there to be Mahoney's love interest. That is it. That is the beginning and the end of her character. There is nothing else to her. I wish I was joking. I'm not. Yeah. Funny enough, Sean Weatherly would go on after this to be one of the original lifeguards on Baywatch. She would play Jill, who most critics of Baywatch, including Obscurus Lupa, who is kind of the unofficial online authority of all things Baywatch, will also say she had no character. She was just kind of there. So I'm sorry. I'm sure Miss Weatherly is a fine actor and a nice person, but it does seem like she had a knack for picking roles that had like no development. And we'll talk about the issues with that relationship here in a second. Rounding out our new recruits, and I apologize, I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, so I'm very sorry. But we have Brian Tucci as Cadet Nagata, who is a exchange officer from Japan, who originally is sent to Mauser's academy, but Mauser doesn't want him because Mauser's a racist, basically, and ships him off to Lassard's, where he fits in and thrives. You know, this is a common stereotype, archetype. I don't know what you call it. And I tried to do some research on this, but it seems like, I guess, tourism to America from Japan had really spiked in the 80s. It seems like there were a lot of jokes about Japanese tourists at the time. So I don't know if that's just if you know, enough time had kind of passed since the war, and you know the economy was good kind of in both places. So yeah, I don't know, but it does seem like there were a lot of Japanese tourists and touristy characters in 80s cinema, and that's pretty much what, at least at the beginning, that's what Nagata kind of is. He's that broken English Japanese, always smiling, oh, I love America type of character. Now he gets some development as this goes on, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So, on the whole, I think we have a good balance. You have a good balance of the original cast. You know, almost all of them are back. You can notice that there is one notable exception, and we'll talk about that. I've already spoken to it at length. I don't want to become too much of a broken record, but it is true that yes, we are still missing G.W. Bailey as Harris, and I don't feel like that loss is felt as much here, because I think they gave Mauser a situation and a character that fit him better than what they had him doing in Police Academy 2, which was basically being a poor man's Harris. Whereas here, his kiss-up, snively little character is much more utilized given the situation. So I feel like, even though we miss Harris, we always miss Harris when he's not around, I feel like Mauser is a better antagonist for this story. So I don't feel like we're missing him as much. So anyway, we have a nice combination of our returning veterans and an interesting assortment of new recruits, kind of ranging from really fun to who's that? So here's the thing about this one. Here's the thing about Police Academy 3. I think this is the first one of these that fully works. This is the first one of the series that I feel they've gotten all the kinks out. They've found the formula that works for them. They have the cast is all familiar with their roles. They all know what their role in the film is. They all know what they need to do. And this film feels very comfortable from an audience standpoint. The world feels lived in. The characters feel familiar. And I think there's a reason why this one and the fourth one are most people's entrance points to the series. Because again, it feels the most at home and the most comfortable in its own skin. You know, again, the first one had a lot of good things, but it was new, it was experimental, they were doing something, you didn't know if it was going to work, you know. The second one was out of its element, and the things that did work about the first one weren't there. Now it feels like all the pieces are in place, everybody came to play, and they've extended the elements that worked, and they have reduced the ones that didn't, or at the very least, found ways, like with Mauser, to make the things that didn't work in the last one work better in this one. So this one, watching this one felt, even though, again, I watched it so many times, this one felt so comfortable and so nostalgic, even though I was kind of rediscovering it for the first time, with plot points and things that I'd totally forgotten about. But this one felt nice and safe and comfy. I really enjoyed rewatching this one, and again, I think it's the first one that really feels like it's a complete picture, a complete film. It doesn't mean that everything works. Not everything in this works, and there's one thing in this that, if you've been listening to these reviews from the beginning, you kind of know where I'm going with this. So, what doesn't work has a name.
Gnarly.
Yeah, so what doesn't work about this movie? Mahoney. Mahoney just... I've come to the conclusion that I just don't like this character. I thought, after rewatching the first one, that it was like, okay, the original incarnation didn't age well. He'll settle back in, and you know, he'll feel more likable and stuff as the series goes on. And I'm sorry, we're 3 movies in, he's in 4 of these, and I just don't like Mahoney at all. Like, I just, and again, I want to stress, it's nothing to do with Steve Guttenberg. I think Guttenberg is a decent enough actor. I just think the character is bad. First of all, let's just break this down. First of all, I love how, so Lassard needs people to save his academy. So Mahoney, let's call Mahoney. Mahoney doesn't do shit. He doesn't do shit in this movie. All of the other returning officers are all doing something. Hightower is teaching, working with canines. Tackleberry is teaching, of course, you know, weapons and self-defense, and he has this really nice scene with Sweet Check where he takes Sweet Check, where he says, I'm gonna teach you how to be a man, because Sweet Check is thinking about washing out, and he's not gonna let him. So he's being a mentor. Jones is doing self-defense with his dubbed Japanese movie shtick. Like I said, Hooks is doing the most. She's teaching most of these classes. You know, Callahan is kind of overseeing everything, and she's teaching self-defense. You never see Mahoney teach anything. He's never there. He's off to the side, sitting next to Lassard and kind of smiling and nodding. But he's not teaching them anything. He's not doing anything. So, here's what he does, aside from play pranks on Mauser. what he does is he gives one of the worst, the fucking worst, the most insincere, we happy few, win one for the Gipper, speeches. And again, I stress, Guttenberg, decent actor, not a bad actor. Not great, but not a bad actor. But folks, Bill Pullman rallying the remnants of humanity to make one last do-or-die stand against an alien invader, he is not. The speech just rings very, very false. Especially since it rewrites history. And this is another one of those things where it's amazing how your perception of something changes as you get older. So one of the things that Mahoney says in his really crappy speech is, we got to do this for Lassard, because Lassard stood by us, and Lassard believed in us, and Lassard did all this, and even I was a screw up, but Lassard never gave up on me, and he made me into, it's like, bullshit! Absolute bullshit! Now look, I love Lassard. Everybody loves Lassard. He is one of the highlights of these movies. He is always funny. George Gaines was a revelation. He was fantastic. But go back and watch that first movie. Lassard didn't do shit to inspire Mahoney. He and Mahoney had 3 scenes together. He had the scene where Mahoney came to him and said, I want to quit, and Lassard said, you can't. Then they had the infamous blowjob scene, which I didn't talk about in the review, but, if you've seen the film, you know what it is. And then they had a little bit of interaction during the riot and at the final graduation. That was it! No, you know who molded Mahoney into the cop that he is? Fucking Harris! Harris is the one that beat discipline into him. Harris is the one that forced him to act like an adult. Harris was the one who, despite how much he wanted to, couldn't kick him out, so he just kept riding him and showing him his actions had consequences. Harris made Mahoney the cop that he is. Not fucking Lassard. Lies! Lies! So yes, that really, oh man, that really just, so I'm sorry. Mahoney just, when he's on screen, I just check out. So, yeah. And that leads us to our next favorite segment of these reviews.
Wicked.
Yes, friends, it's time once again to play How Offended Should I Be? So what in these movies did not age well or are problematic in hindsight? Well, I have to say that I think that this one so far is the least offensive of all of them, of the 3 we've watched. Like, there are way less offensive jokes in these. There's no gay bashing that I can recall. Like, even the required return to the Blue Oyster is not as questionable as it was in previous films. Matter of fact, it was kind of flattering. There's this really funny scene where, to get revenge on Proctor, Mahoney sets him up with a woman who's supposed to be playing the hooker from the first film in the infamous blowjob scene, but it's not the same person. And she takes Proctor upstairs, she gets him naked and pushes him out into the hall and locks him out. So now he's running around the streets naked, and ends up at the Blue Oyster where, everybody sees him and just applauds him. Like, I think that's actually kind of flattering, really. So this one, there's actually less problematic stuff. once again, when there is some problematic issues, they are smart enough in most cases to regulate them to characters who are supposed to be distasteful. Mauser's reactions and his slurs towards Nataga when he finds him at his academy. Like, again, this is a guy you're not supposed to agree with, but still, some of the things he says are pretty harsh. He never uses any direct slurs, but he comes pretty damn close. I don't think there's no negative black stereotypes, again, except for the questionable scene with Hedges. Now, here's another one that's interesting. I'd be interested to hear people's take on it. Nagata does kind of have a very stereotypical broken Japanese dialect, and kind of think of offensive stereotypical Japanese lines, and that's what he sounds like. I'm not going to say them for you. You can imagine them for yourselves. Which is interesting because the actor is American. He is, of course, of Asian descent, but he speaks fluent English. And we'll talk about that in a second. We're gonna do a little deep dive on him because he's fascinating. But so the portrayal and the way they kind of introduce the character is a little iffy, but the character himself is actually pretty good, in my opinion. And again, I have to stress, this is coming from cis white man perspective. So I am not the culture or the race being lampooned here. So it's easy for me to say, oh, I don't think there's a problem with it. So I'd be interested to know, so if there are any listeners out there, if anybody hearing this is of Asian descent and is familiar with Nagata or this kind of stereotype from this time period, I'd love to know, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about this? How do you feel specifically about the character of Nagata? Do you think he's a good character, even if the portrayal is questionable? Do you think he's not? Is he more problematic? Please let me know. I would love to know. Again, we have Drive Home Reviews has a Facebook group. Please join and feel free to leave comments. The reviews are also on YouTube, so you can comment there. But I would very much like to know. So if there is anybody out there who could kind of present us with your perspective, I would very much like to hear it. But again, I find the character of Nagata to be fine. He's capable. He's intelligent. He has definite sex appeal. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. So yeah, well, I think there is something in the performance that kind of is like, the character, I think, is still good. But again, I'd like to know what you think. The biggest issue, once again, comes from our friend Mahoney. As mentioned, Adams, Sean Weatherly, is our new Kim Cattrall. Again, I mentioned this in the last review, but this is when we start falling into the story trap of every movie. There's a new girl for Mahoney to lust after. It was Kim Cattrall here. Or before it, Sean Weatherly now. You're not going to believe who it's going to be in the next one. I didn't believe it when I saw the credits, but anyway. And that's kind of all she's here to do. So the first interaction he has with her, if you can believe it, is worse than his show me your thighs thing that he did with Kim Cattrall. So here he basically tells her that her room assignment is sleeping with him and starts coming on to her. And it's like, in a way, it's not, in terms of the language used, it's not as bad. But what's worse in this one is that this is coming from someone in authority. Mahoney is now one of the people in charge of these cadets. This is like a teacher hitting on a student, joking or not. And I know there are people out there. Actually, I'll save that comment. I'll save that for a second, but it's gonna be apt, I feel. So he already is crossing a major line. So then, later in the film, after his terrible St. Crispin's Day speech, then she comes up to him and she says, "I'm sorry I was so mean to you when you came on to me. You were just being cute." And he's like, "Well, I'll accept your apology if you accept mine." It's like, ha 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 ha. It's like, no! It's not okay. What he did was not okay. It's not okay what he did. And just go, to write it off with the excuse of, you were just being cute. No, he knew what he was doing. Look, I have a lot of sympathy for someone who's trying to be charming, but doesn't have the tools, doesn't have the delivery, doesn't have the, just the charisma to pull it off. You know, I'm one of those guys, honestly. Yeah, if you ever see Tucker and Dale versus Evil, there's this great scene right at the beginning where Tucker sees the college students and he sees the young girl and he's like, I'd love to talk to her. You know, and he's like, go talk to her. Just, laugh and, be funny, just be you, and, she'll like you. He's like, okay. So he goes up and just, y'all going camping, and just came off as creepy. I have sympathy for people like that. I do believe there are people like that who aren't trying to be scuzzy, but just, they don't know how to be charming, and I have sympathy for that. That is not this. Mahoney is a scumbag, and he knows he's a scumbag. Because that's what was popular in the 80s. And to just kind of write it off as, you were just being cute, is really, again, that's putting it on her to kind of say, I shouldn't have objected to his sexual harassment of me from this man in a position of authority over me. Look, and I know, so now I'm going to say this. I know that there are people out there who are going to say the age-old line, it's just a joke. Let's not get it. It's a joke. He's being funny. It's charming. It's just a joke. And yeah, I can get behind that to a certain extent. On certain things, I can get behind it's a joke. And I do believe that sometimes we need to not take everything as an attack. That sometimes things are just trying to be funny. But here's the problem, folks. And you can't deny this. Again, this kind of character and this kind of interaction was very, very prevalent at this time. There were so many of them. Do you ever wonder why so many, we've had to have these discussions in modern times about how you talk to women and what's appropriate and what's not? It's because society and pop culture and stuff has enforced the idea that this kind of character and this kind of interaction was okay. And I'm not one to kind of, blame the media for everything. Like, I have never felt the need or the desire to smoke because I saw someone on TV do it. I grew up watching Transformers, G.I. Joe, Ninja Turtles, and Power Rangers, and I'm so non-confrontational that I make Quentin Tarantino look like Gandhi. But I do believe that the things that we see and the examples that are set for us have an effect on us, especially at a young age. And people saw things like this at a young age. And I think it can have, I think it's had a negative effect. And I think there's a reason why we now have to have these conversations about characters and interactions like this. So, yeah, it's not just a joke. And while, yes, not as bad technically as what was done in the first film, still not great.
Red.
So, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be a downer with the, how offended should I be segment, but it is important that we pay attention to these issues and we acknowledge things that are questionable or problematic. It's good to have the discussion, So I don't want this to be a downer because, again, this is probably, so far, the best of the Police Academy films. And even my personal distaste for the character of Mahoney doesn't really come into play here because Mahoney doesn't do much. A lot of the focus is on a lot of the other characters. He's starting to take a back seat, I think mainly because Steve Guttenberg was starting to be very popular. This would be around the highlight of his career, so they probably didn't get him for as long as they had him previously, which is beneficial because while he is kind of taking a back step, that allowed some of the other characters to step up a little bit. For instance, we had more Commandant Lassard in this one than we've had in any of the previous films, and I always think that is for the best. I love Commandant Lassard. George Gaines, you cannot have too much of him, especially in this role. He's so funny and just so genuine. There's this wonderful little physical bit, and I can only imagine how many times they had to film it, where all the cadets and the officers are lined up and Lassard's kind of giving them a pep talk, and they're all standing at attention and he's walking, but to keep up with him, they all have to keep stepping to the side in unison and ending up right back where they were. That could not have been easy for them to master. But little things like that make this film work. I mentioned this before. I really liked the little scene with Sweetcheck and Tackleberry. I wish that would have played out a little bit more. I wish we would have gotten a little bit more of a payoff to that, and actually seen Tackleberry working with him, and see him kind of getting better and better. It would have been nice, but it wasn't necessary. But there are some other really wonderful things in here, and I want to talk about this and talk about the two actors specifically. One of the real highlights of this movie is one of the side relationships. So I mentioned this back in the original Police Academy review, that one of the things we have to give the film credit for, if I'm going to point out all the things that are problematic and out of date, I do have to also talk about the things that were ahead of their time and revolutionary for that period. And one of them, as I mentioned, is the characterization of Lieutenant Callahan, played by Leslie Esterbrook, and how she is a very sexy, powerful, in control woman. This is the person who in lesser films would be the love interest of someone like Mahoney, and he'd wear her down and show her, oh no, I'm really the man of this relationship and all that. They were smart enough not to ever pair her up with Mahoney, or even have them have a great deal of scenes together. They kind of share looks and little acknowledgments back and forth, but I don't think they ever actually interact, as far as I can recall. Callahan picks who she wants. She decides who she's in love with, and she makes the moves, and the guys are usually very grateful for it. And in this one, they made I don't know whose idea this was, but it was brilliant. They made the decision to team her up with Nagata, the Japanese exchange officer, who is so much smaller than she is. I wonder if it's because the idea of someone so small and kind of being right at her breast level in terms of where his eyes are. I wonder if that's what kind of made them think. But they have a very brief relationship. Well, not brief, it goes into the next film, but it doesn't get a lot of screen time, but it is just so endearing that she takes an immediate shine to him, seeing how he can handle himself during one of the self-defense classes. He, of course, is attracted to her because she's an Amazon, and he goes to Jones for love advice, and he goes to try to woo her with romance, and Callahan's just like, yeah, in America, talk is cheap, and just jumps down on the bed with him and buries his face in her tits, and he couldn't be happier, as could we all. So it's one of the best ways to die, I say. And they work so well together. It is such a cute, wonderful relationship. I'm glad they keep it going and mention it into the next film. Interesting side note to that story. Apparently, according to Leslie Easterbrook, she had actually met Brian Tucci previous to Police Academy many years earlier in a production of The King and I that she was in with Ricardo Montalban, where she played Brian Tucci's twin sister was in that production, and she played his sister's mother. So now she arrives on the set for Police Academy 3, trying to figure out who her love interest is going to be, and it's this guy who she knew when he was 14. That's got to be really surreal. I want to take a little moment to talk about these two actors, because they're fascinating people. And that's one of the things about doing a series like this, is getting a chance to kind of do not so much a deep dive. There are podcasts that do much deeper and in-depth look at people and events than I do. I do a couple minutes of a Google search. But still, the information that I found on both of these people are extremely fascinating, just in terms of their careers, especially when you consider that they're not exactly household names. Like, even Steve Guttenberg is kind of still a household name and a fixture of the 80s, and while people may know Callahan, they don't necessarily know Leslie Easterbrook. So these are people who tend to have, kind of like David Goff with Tackleberry, these are people, or David Graff, I should say. These are people that have very long and distinguished careers, but because they're character actors, a lot of times their accomplishments slip through the cracks a little bit. So I just want to shine some light on some interesting factoids about these two actors before we continue on. So let's talk first about Leslie Easterbrook. So first of all, interesting that she was adopted when she was 9 months old. She had a very long and distinguished stage career, and is actually an accomplished singer. She's been in several Broadway musicals. She sang the national anthem at one of the Super Bowls. So in the party scene for this film, when she's singing, that's actually her. Just like that's actually David Graff playing the saxophone. So again, this kind of very smart decision to hone in on the skills that the actors already had and bring those into the film. Makes it feel a little bit more lived in and more organic. But she had, again, a very distinguished theater career. She appeared in a Broadway production of Neil Simon's California Suite in 1976. She also starred with Kevin Kline in the Tony Award-winning production, the original production of On the 20th Century in 1978. Her first big hit was as Rhonda Lee on Laverne and Shirley in 1980, when they relocated the focus of the show to LA. So a pretty big role there. She's another one that's been on just a ton of stuff. Murder, She Wrote, Diagnosis Murder, Baywatch, Matlock, The Dukes of Hazzard. probably what she's been best known for in recent years is in 2007 is what my notes say. 2007, she was in Rob Zombie's film, The Devil's Rejects, which is the sequel to House of a Thousand Corpses, where she played Mother Firefly. And this film, for horror fans, is a big sleeper hit. And the movie was so well received, she actually won several awards. She won, I love the name of these words, she won the Chainsaw Award for Best Supporting Actress, and the Fangoria Chainsaw Award, and the Scream Award for the Most Vile Villain. So, I like those kind of things. I like when people win these kind of out there, more interesting awards than just, I want an Oscar, I want an Emmy. Like, how many people can say they want a Chainsaw Award? Like, that's pretty spectacular. I really enjoyed this quote of hers about playing Callahan. And she says, the funny thing is, it's not me at all. I've never played tough. I've played all sorts of things, but I've never played someone who's intimidating or someone who was aggressively sexual. I was of a size that I never played the girl who got the guy, so I wondered how I could do it. But I did it. She apparently worked with her ex-husband on it, like in a gym, and she found a riding crop and was using it as a prop. And she said that she went into the audition and scared the producer and the director, and they all backed up out of their seats. And one of them even fell out of their chair, and she left thinking, oh no, I've really blown it. And then she got a call saying, we want you to come play this part. So, a fascinating career for Leslie Easterbrook. I do have to say, one thing I'm not a fan of is she is a member of the NRA and has done a lot of pro-gun work, which that conflicts with some of my personal beliefs, but learn to live and accept people who have different values than you. That's what I say. So that's just a little bit about Leslie Easterbrook. Brian Tucci, who played Nagata, this guy, I am so glad I did the deep dive on him, because this fucking guy, he is nerd royalty. Like, seriously, this guy's nerd pedigree is, like, flawless. And the fact that I never knew this about him staggers my mind. So I wanted to share some of the highlights of this guy's tremendous and very lengthy career, because he started out as a child actor. And so he's been working for a long, long time by the time he hit Police Academy, and even after that, working with franchises like the Brady Bunch, the Partridge Family, Adam 12. Here's the first one. Oh my God, this fact is so kick-ass. So he appeared in the original Star Trek episode, And the Children Shall Lead. Okay? And then, like 20-some years later, he would appear in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Night Terrors. This makes him one of only a handful of actors who have appeared on both the original series and The Next Generation. That is rarefied air. Like, that is, like, he is up there with the likes of Leonard Nimoy, James Doohan, DeForest Kelley, Mark Leonard, Majel Barrett. Like, that is freaking outstanding company to be in. He's also well known for his voice work. He's done a lot of voiceover work. I found it interesting that he was one of the voices on the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan, which is a animated takeoff of the Charlie Chan series, which was very popular at the time. But again, adding to his nerd credentials, he has done voices for Challenge of the GoBots, Scooby-Doo, The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, Mortal Kombat, Batman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, Kim Possible, Family Guy, Static Shock, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and most awesome of all, and this is the fact that really blew my mind, he was the voice of Leonardo for the first 3 original live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. Fucking awesome! That makes him a nerd god, in my opinion. He has got, yeah, like I said, his nerd hit list is second to none. So, Mr. Tachi, I take my hat off to you, sir. Also, I should also mention he appears in another 80s standout series of films, Revenge of the Nerds. So, that's 2 of the most recognizable franchises of the 80s that he's in. So, fuck, man, this guy kicks ass. Just amazing. Alright, so we are kind of reaching the end here of this one. I gotta say, I think I talked more about this one than I thought I was going to. I was a little concerned about, like, how am I going to stretch this? Because some of these, you know, as we get further into this, if they're good, there's not really a whole lot to say about them. Describing jokes is, like, not a good way to, you know, influence listeners. But now that we're kind of wrapping up, so the question we always ask is not just does it stand up, but how does it fit within its own series? And I think we've already answered that question. I think it stands up as a standalone movie. Like I said, I think, from what I've understood from other people I've talked to, this one and the 4th one were most people's gateway into the Police Academy franchise. So that tells you right there that it stands up as its own movie. And as I mentioned, as a part of a series, it builds on what was there, it takes what worked, it jettisons what doesn't, and all in all, I think this is an excellent entry into the franchise, and one of the better films in there. Perfect? Not by any means, but I think if you're watching Police Academy 3, I think you're going to have a good time. And interestingly enough, as far as I can recall, it's only going to get better with the next one, which is interesting because, you know, normally the joke is sequels get worse as they go, but I think this one, at least into the next one, is going to get even stronger because finally, when we return to the Police Academy universe, the last piece of the puzzle is finally there. Yes, folks, when we return, Harris is back. And I cannot wait for that. So we will see you again at Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol. So thank you for listening. Thanks for coming along. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movie.